Hello, my name is Gia Lopez, and this is my video walkthrough of my StarCraft 2 final level build. From the beginning of my design process, I made sure to take extra time to really understand StarCraft 2 to the best of my ability. I spent various days playing different levels and game modes. I also looked at different forums that explained the basic mechanics of StarCraft 2, as well as any other information one would need to get better at playing RTS games. From this research, I was able to learn some of the most important aspects of what makes a StarCraft 2 level. Some of these include the standard amount of bases, amount of entrances/exits, the number of mineral fields and Vespene geysers, and the use of verticality and symmetry, and other important items like the destructible rocks. I made sure to add these to my level and ensure that they were used in a manner that would capitalize on the core mechanics of micro and macro management. So, in my level, I have a total of 6 bases on each side, so 12 in total. This is the starting base. It is at a higher point than any other of my bases. This is used to help create this is the most important base. Nothing else is at its level kind of thing. There's this base directly next to it. And then going over to this side, there are 2 more bases. One of this is a rich mineral field, and there's one more on this side and one more on the middle lane. So for the number of minerals are pretty standard in StarCraft 2. They're usually just 8 mineral fields and 2 Vespene geysers, unless they are rich mineral fields like this one. Then that would be 6 rich mineral fields and 2 rich Vespene geysers. So you can see I kind of tried to use a lot of verticality here. This, again, as I mentioned, the starting base would be the highest area, but I did want to make sure that I had different levels of verticality, like this one's at a 2nd level, and this one's the ground level. I also utilized it here. This is also at a 2nd level. I tried to make sure that I used verticality in order to make sure that nothing was just too plain, everything was on the ground level sort of thing. Another thing I want to talk about is my chasms. These chasms, you can't really see them very well right now because of the fog of war. But I created these chasms by essentially putting them at the lowest level possible, so that no units could go through them. And it also helped create lanes for my map, which is something that I wanted to do. These chasms serve as a way for air units to go through. I also kept in mind air units while making my level. I wanted to make sure that it was something that that became more useful in this type of map. Hopefully we can see that in play in this game. Lastly, my middle lane here. I created a diagonal of destructible rocks as a barrier. This means I did this in order to ensure that an aggressive approach like the Zergs wouldn't be able to just rush through this middle lane, which would lead them essentially directly to the other team. Yeah, so these destructible rocks can be used. They obviously take a little bit longer to break, but once broken, you have like a direct access, and that is very beneficial. I also added bases here in the middle, one on each side, in order to push people to go into the middle lane, like, oh, there's another mineral field here, we need more resources. I mentioned the increase of air units being useful here, but I also want to say that I added these side lanes to combat that, to essentially balance air units and regular ground units, since having these paths would allow for a clearer connection to different areas. So technically no one unit would be more beneficial than the other. For my level, I wanted to make sure I didn't make something too big. The first iteration of my map had a playable area size of 260 by 260. This was considerably a huge size in the editor, and once I began to implement my design, I realized I had a lot of empty space. Therefore, I decided to remake my level, this time using the standard StarCraft 2 map size of 128 by 128. This is considered medium size. I will admit I was worried about having too much unusable space throughout the use of my chasms. However, I do think that the size and shape of these create an interesting layout that sets my level apart from other levels. I divided my level into 3 lanes, created using these chasms. This created different paths the players could take to explore and attack the others, and I made sure to add paths that connected to the side and middle lanes to provide more fairness. This is what I was talking about over here. With these big chasms and the side paths connecting them to each other. These are also regular side lanes that take you directly to the other side of the map, but it is a longer path, so it would be more beneficial to go through the middle if you are looking for an aggressive playstyle. Yeah, having these side lanes provides an alternative route if the players don't want to take a fast and aggressive playstyle. These can be used to create defensive measures and or take slower approach to attacking the player. To make sure my level was complex enough and not too simple, I used differing levels of verticality, symmetry, and power. The levels of verticality made it so that each base was unique in some way since they were not all on the same ground. You can see this is the highest level. This is directly beneath it, and then this is the ground level. Then I have one base on ground level, one on the second level, and then another one on base level. Through my feedback, I learned that players found my layout interesting and unique, but not too complex that they were confused as to where they were going or what they needed to do. Throughout my design process, I tried to keep in mind the different strategies that could be employed successfully. As I mentioned before, I tried finding ways to balance against an aggressive playstyle, something that is more typical of the Surge race, which we have seen as they have been just attacking the Terrans over here. I wanted to do this while also finding ways to adhere to more defensive playstyles, something more typical of that Protoss race. And being able to find a balance between these also allows for a race like the Terrans, who usually adhere to a strategy that is between both of these, to also do well. However, I do want to say that I understand that each race can be played in any way using whatever strategy the player decides to use. For this reason, I created different paths and employed destructible rocks and chasms to adhere to any strategy the players could come up with. This probably doesn't account for every strategy, as there would be an infinite amount of them, but I tried my best to balance my level to the usual ones. So some of the RTS guidelines that I took into consideration when making my level include hook, symmetry, balance, choke points / defensible positions, resources, terrain layers, and size. So the hook of my level, I believe, is the chasm, and how it plays to the strength of air units, which is unfortunate that the AI that I'm using to playtest right now haven't been using those. I did have some playtests where these chasms were used a lot more frequently. I thought this could be an interesting mechanic, as I have not seen many levels do this. However, I wanted to make sure that my level was still balanced and fair for different playstyles that might not want to use as many air units, something like we've seen in this game so far. Because of this, I created many different ground paths that connected, and having the different levels of verticality allowed for different ways to defend against these air units. As far as symmetry goes, I made sure my level was fully symmetrical, making sure that no one side had an advantage over the other. Having it be symmetrical also made it so that the players had some notion of where the other player's base was and how areas were connected. This meant that players only had to learn one side of the map to be able to know the full layout. Oh, here we can see air unit using the chasms to get over to the other side. As we've been able to see, my level had various choke points. The biggest choke point, I believe, would probably be the middle lane, because it has the shortest path to the other team's base. Other choke points exist in the form of my side lanes. These have longer paths to the other team's base, but these lanes are wide enough to allow for armies to accumulate and have combat in these areas, which is what we've seen the most out of so far. My side lanes also work as defensible positions, especially in the very corners where bases were also located. The bases in turn had different vertical levels and ramps where more defenses could be played. Seems like the Terrans aren't playing too defensively, as the Zergs are playing very aggressively, and I don't think they have enough time to come up with some more defenses there. Resources. Resources were important since they were the backbone of creating and managing armies. In order to account for these, I added a standard number of bases that all had the standard amount of mineral fields and geysers, as I had explained before. I used verticality to help create defensive positions and balance my level. Finally, the size of my map was something I paid close attention to. As I mentioned previously, I ended up creating various iterations of my level to play around with the size I wanted to use. Ultimately, I decided the standard size of 128 by 128 was the best choice for my level, as I wanted to be as close as possible to what a standard StarCraft 2 level would be like. That is my map, essentially. I think I covered everything that I wanted to. I will give one final look through of my level, and I won't make us sit through the whole battle, as that would take very long. But here's, yeah, so, oh. So that is my level. Thank you for watching.